everybody, welcome to another Spectrum Economics video presentation. Today I'd like to cover a topic I like to call social impact evaluation, and this is something that I developed over about a year when I was working with Building Queensland. So that was from about the beginning of 2006 to early 2017. And social impact evaluation, I wouldn't say it's exactly new, it's been around for a little while, but it hasn't really been given much of a limelight, much attention to maybe more recently. And there's been other stuff as well, such as social returns on investment that's been around a little while, and there's social impact assessment as well that's been around a little while. So this is a little bit different. It's taken some of those ideas and some of those concepts, but it's intended to work a lot more closely with cost-benefit analysis, so the two can actually feed off each other. And also it integrates with a number of other areas such as benefits realization, financial analysis, and even sustainability potentially. So it's considered very broad, and it's potentially can be quite a strong backbone to a lot of these other things. It's quite important, and so cost-benefit analysis in particular, I'd say. Okay, so I'm just going to get into what I'm going to cover off in today's video. So first of all, we're going to look at what are social impacts, how we define them. Then I'm going to have a basic overview of the application of social impact evaluation, how it integrates with cost-benefit analysis, how it can be applied to your business case. I'm also going to take a look at impact risk assessment. This is actually quite an important part of social impact evaluation. A lot of that comes off it, though it is quite qualitative, you might say. But again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. And talk about how it can actually be done within a spreadsheet as well. So there are time-saving approaches to actually looking at. In fact, it doesn't have to be that time-intensive in the sense that it can be done reasonably quickly, even though it may sound like it's a lot of work at first. And also I'm going to be looking at how you can report it, how it can be reported maybe within a chapter, within a business case, or how it can actually become part of a CVA, and what are some of the standalone elements of social impact evaluation. Though mostly there isn't too many, it actually integrates into a lot of other areas. Alright, so how have we defined social impacts? To start with, it's a good place to start, right? Our definition. So define it here very broadly as social impacts have been defined as the total impacts to society from investment in infrastructure and non-infrastructure projects. These impacts include impacts to government agencies, external stakeholders, and society as a whole. So like I said, this is a very broad definition, and it doesn't just cover off some of the typical things you might be thinking of: community impacts, maybe social capital, cultural impacts, maybe health, and some of that. It goes a bit beyond that and includes environmental as well, which I've defined it as comes under social, and also economic too. And if you're doing a cost-benefit analysis, you know that it's actually a social cost-benefit analysis, not a financial analysis, though even with the financial stuff there's a little bit of integration in there too. So I'm just going to talk about that a little bit later. Now I'm going to cover off the broad sort of approach that I would recommend taking to social impact evaluation. So let's start off with, let's say we've defined what our social impacts are. So what do we do with them next? And I'm going to talk about what those are in a few slides from now. But so what have we got here? Can you monetize them? That's probably one of the biggest and first questions. And that determines whether it goes straight into the cost-benefit analysis or whether we actually need to do a little bit more work. So let's just say that, yeah, okay, they can be monetized, or we believe they can be. So we go and look for existing guidance, and if it's in there, straight up. So there's some quite good stuff out there, like for transport, for example, they've got the transport guidelines, they've got unit values, for things like values for time, values of operating costs, maintenance, and all that sort of stuff. And there's unit values that can be applied to minutes that you've saved, or litres of fuel and things like that. So all that sort of stuff can go straight into the cost-benefit analysis. That seems fairly simple. There may be other stuff that we're not so sure of, and there may not be in the guidance itself, but we can investigate it. And there's something known as social returns on investment, and it's very similar to cost-benefit analysis. Some might argue that it kind of is a branch of cost-benefit analysis, but this is focused typically, I think it's in the UK, on a lot of smaller projects where you actually got more engagement with the community and the stakeholders, so you actually rely on them to actually provide feedback and input into coming up with some of these values. And if that is considered a feasible way of going about it, then yeah, we'd maybe be able to include some of those values, but rather than do a social return on investment itself, but actually include those values to go into the cost-benefit analysis. But again, whatever comes out of that needs to be referenced, it needs to be sourced. So what if we find that it can't be monetized? Then we turn to what we call an impact risk assessment. So that's basically, it's like a 5x5 or 4x4 matrix that looks at a probability of an event occurring and also the consequence. So they can be both positive and negative. And then from that, we should be able to determine how material that impact is. So it would be considered material if you know there's a high probability and it's got a high level of consequence of that occurring. That would be, it would be considered a material impact. And those ones we can't just ignore, so we'd have to find a way of quantifying that. Even if we can't put it in dollars, maybe we'll be able to put it into time, for example. Like if you are getting an operation and there's a 6-month delay, because of this project, whatever, you've upgraded the hospital, maybe you've got more, you've got larger hospital, you've got more operating theatres, you've got more doctors and stuff like that. People can actually, get their operation in 2 months instead of 6 months. Or likewise, there could be some solutions, preventive solutions, so there's less people requiring these operations. Alternative health, for example, there may be some alternative health. So maybe you're reducing the number of people that are sick from, down from, let's say, 200 down to like 50. And then again, the waiting time is reduced. So what is the value of 4 months reduced waiting time for a particular operation? Not necessarily put a dollar value on it, but you can actually quantify it as just 4 months, and that can actually be stated, and that can actually go into your social impact evaluation. That can be included later on. I'm going to discuss something else later on how that can be applied. What if your impacts are not considered material? Then that one is a little bit more simple. You just put a simple, I'd say, qualitative statement just to keep people aware that those impacts are there, but are not considered overly significant. And also some of the major ones may not be quantified, which is quite bad, and many people argue if it can't really be quantified, it can't really be that significant. But for the case of this argument, if there is some stuff that you feel, then you'd have to argue that quite strongly within your report. Alright, so what have we got here? We've got the social impact baseline. So this is actually worth discussing, and it's actually quite a key concept, and I'm going to cover a few other key concepts off in a second. But this is the one I want to mention first. It's probably the most important. So I talked about with cost-benefit analysis, you have your base case, and that is what you compare all of your projects with. So it's a yardstick to measure your benefits against. And for social impact evaluation, the baseline is very, very similar to the base case. I like to think of it as a little bit broader. It goes a little bit further afield, so you may have a larger reference group, for example, what you might be looking at than if you have a cost-benefit analysis. And this is also going to be including a lot of your social stuff that is not necessarily included in your base case for your CBA. So again, it's got to be important that it's kept realistic. So again, assumptions are going to need to be included regarding future investment or future changes in behavior. You can't have a scenario where it's bad today and it's just going to keep getting worse. And we have this apocalypse scenario, as you can see here, as I've mentioned in some of the CBA videos as well, that's just not realistic. It's generally not going to happen. Even if there is no investment, for example, people will generally change their behavior and find alternatives. So that's why the social impact baseline is so important, to get it accurate, because it is the yardstick, what you're measuring against. All right, so now I want to cover on a concept. I've covered in a few videos, but I like to get back to this because this is a foundation for a lot of things. And this is utility, and utility is your level of satisfaction. And that could be from, anything really. It could be from something good that has made you feel, improved your quality of life. It could be something bad that's actually reduced your quality of life. But we're sort of measuring along the lines of utility as a concept. And you see my other videos are going into a little bit more detail on what that is. But for the sake of social impact evaluation, just think of it as a measurement of basically what we're trying to achieve is a maximization of this utility and what is going to give us the most utility. Therefore, that's generally where your investments probably want to be going. And it moves a little bit away from the dollars as well, though a dollar improvement can be considered as an improvement in utility as well. But it does get a little bit complicated because a lot of things you can't put a dollar value on. Another concept I want to talk about is materiality. This one's interesting as well, in the sense that one material impact is most likely going to be far more important, far more significant than maybe 10, 20 immaterial impacts, in the sense that if it's immaterial, it's something that can be adjusted to, it's something that people can do about. So there's 20 different things that is causing a bit of aggro, but you can do something, you can work around that. In the end, it's not a real problem. But if you have something that's called a significant or material impact, and that's something that you may not necessarily be able to recover from, and that's something that we need to focus on a lot more. An example I got here is in relation to flooding. So imagine you've got a flood for, let's say, 2 days. It may not be a big deal because, let's say, your road's access and all is cut off for 2 days. Because generally these sort of floods are a little bit more predictable. You probably had a number of them before, especially if it's seasonal. You probably stocked up on a number of different supplies and all that sort of thing. So 2 days without access, you're probably going to be fine. The costs are going to be fairly low. What if we have a 2-week closure, something that's far less from flooding, 2-week closure from flooding, which is far less predictable, something that generally doesn't happen, and something that is a lot harder to prepare for, then that would actually be considered material, because there's a lot more additional costs that could come into that. Like, for example, perishables would be a big deal. You wouldn't be able to get your perishable food in and out. There could be medical or health problems that people need medication in a certain period of time. That's cut off. You may need to have some evacuations and things that wouldn't necessarily be necessary for just 2 days. So you've got all of these costs that are thrown in from the longer flood period that you don't have with the shorter flood. And a lot of that can't necessarily be covered off in a cost-benefit analysis so easily. Some of this shorter, smaller stuff, like I said, the 2-day flood, it can be, but not for the longer floods where there's so many more factors that come into it. So you wouldn't have for flooding necessarily a linear relationship. So the shorter floods, the cost would be significantly lower, whereas the longer floods, like 2 days, well, compared to 2 weeks, 14 days, that's 7 times longer. So the costs are not going to be 7 times greater. It could be 20, 30, 40 times greater, simply because a lot of new things, new elements are involved with that, because the lack of ability to prepare for such a long period without access, for example. Alright, so I'm going to talk about what social impacts are. So you're probably wondering, I've been talking about this whole time, the concepts and stuff, but I haven't actually gone into what social impacts are. So I think it can be defined as like 7 or 8 different categories. Like I mentioned before, your environmental comes into it, and your economic as well. But your more traditional sort of social impact stuff, and some of the stuff, if you're familiar with social impact assessment, you're looking at things like community benefits, your lifestyle benefits, I think gender equality, health benefits, quality of life benefits, and you look at all those, sorry, I call it benefits, I apologise, impacts. So you look at all these impacts, and like I said, some are going to be positive, some are going to be negative, and this is all in relation to a project, and these are the sort of things you'd be looking at. If you actually look at there's some guidelines available in the Building Queensland website. It actually has of course, social impact evaluation guide. You can actually download that. That's got a lot of information regarding what social impacts are, and it breaks down the categories in a little bit more detail than what I'm talking about here. Alright, so what's next? So how do you go about identifying social impacts? So there's a number of ways of doing that, and as like I mentioned, you can use the list that I mentioned just now, but you can also look at previous projects, if there's projects of a similar nature, and what impacts have been identified with those. And also if there's what we call ex post evaluations, so that is going back, looking at a project and actually looking at what impacts have been realized over the life of the project. And if that has been done, it's rare, I gotta admit, they are kind of hard to find, but you can actually use those impacts from those projects to help you define the impacts for your project. Also, another good way of going about it, and something I think you need to give a little bit of a push, especially with social impact evaluation, more so than cost-benefit analysis, and that is your stakeholder engagement. Actually getting as many people involved as you can, relevant people, shall I say, key stakeholders, and a big one is part of the community, because you're actually doing this for the community, and actually getting the community's impact on what is actually important, and what the impacts really are. And sometimes not always clear from a planner. They may see identify a problem, smack, and just roll on it that way, but the community are actually those out there that are experiencing these impacts, and to get their input is actually quite critical. And to get it involved at different stages as well. So it won't be just at the end, which is typical, that you've already come up with a decision and you're just telling the people what's happening, which government typically does. But to get them early on in the planning stages and development stages, and even talk to them in regards to data, and also using them to collect data if you're using stated preference surveys, for example, contingent valuation, or even if you're observing behaviour as well with revealed preference. All of this can potentially involve stakeholder engagement. Revealed preference, sorry, probably not so much, but definitely stated preference surveys, you're actually going out and asking them what is the impact of such and such a change. And also what is good as well is if you can actually get the stakeholders together in like a workshop or something where they can actually express their views in regards to some of the impacts that have been identified, and also get them to identify more impacts as well. And they can even contribute to constructing an impact risk assessment, which actually I'm going to talk about now, what an impact risk assessment is. Okay, sorry, before I talk about that, just one more thing, and that is categorizing of impacts. This is somewhat similar to what I talked about just now with the structure where you put them, whether it's cost-benefit analysis or social impact evaluation. So just a summary of that. So if an impact can be quantified and monetized, it should go into the cost-benefit analysis straight up. Also would recommend it's included in the social impact evaluation as well, because not always all aspects of a particular impact can be truly appreciated. And to actually include that in an impact risk assessment, you might get another different take on it, rather than just relying on the unit values presented from whatever guidance you may have. For other impacts that, let's say, that can be quantified and not monetized, it can't go in the CBA, so it's just a social impact evaluation. And if it can't be quantified or monetized, then it should go into just your social impact evaluation. And then generally it would just be like a little statement about what that impact is. And often the case, it's not that it can't be quantified, but sometimes the impacts are just very, very difficult to quantify. And it's use up a lot of resources and a lot of time in order to do that quantification. All right, so now, I'm going to get into the impact risk assessment. This is very simply done. It's a 4x4 or 5x5 matrix in what we got here. So you're looking at probability versus your consequence. You go on the top bar, and your probability along the column, I think it is, and for the rows across. So what we've got in this one here, just for example, I've broken it down into low, medium, and high. So the impacts that are low are those considered insignificant, and that's arranged across all probabilities. And then once you get up to moderate, then I think you've only got one green square, which is indicating that it has to be very rare for it to be considered a low impact if it's a moderate. Because you've got some moderate as well, if you look up, that have got a very high probability, and then you'd actually consider that as a serious impact. And I think in the case of this matrix, for example, we've got 8 squares. So the most problematic being the ones that is almost certain and is significant. So that'd be right in that top corner. So those are the impacts that we're going to consider material. Anything that falls in the red area is material. Anything that falls in the yellow area, the medium, would be possibly material. Then the green is the low and it's not material. And you could probably just look at that in terms of qualitative descriptions. So again, we've got different categories just explaining what it means by insignificant, minor, moderate, major, and significant, and what that is. And it's like I said before, it's not just the negative, it's also the positive as well. So you've got to bear that in mind. All right, and what we normally recommend is that you don't just do this once. Once you've done it the first time round, and have identified certain impacts, positive ones for example, that maybe we can do certain things to our project that maybe can enhance these benefits. So you have to decide whether it's worthwhile, what are the costs of doing that. And if it can be, then as you can see here, we've got PH3 moves to PH3 in the red area. So that's gone from possibly significant, or was it possibly medium, so which is possibly material, to something that actually is material. And likewise, you could have negative impacts that you can put mitigation strategies and to actually reduce the impact of those negative impacts. So we've got NH1 moving down to NH1 into the yellow area. So it was previously considered material negative impact. Now it's only possibly a material impact. And again, even that could eventually also move into the green area. You could do a little bit further research in terms of whether we truly think that it could be material or not, and may not be at all. So that again, you can use that for mitigation strategies, enhancement strategies, and also further research into where these impacts fall. And this can also be enhanced again by stakeholder engagement and participation. And you can also still look at the impact risk assessment, impact risk assessment in terms of sensitivity analysis. So you would have a number of assumptions that were applied during your initial assessment, which with any assessment you have to do that. But there might be certain things like, for example, we've got here positive impact, PE1, and then that moves from possibly material to material. And that could be something related to growth, for example. You may have a growth rate of 2%. And let's say you're enhancing a hospital, for example, you're catering for more people. But because the growth rate is quite low, the impact is quite immaterial. But then if you increase the growth rate and realize that, say, we're preparing for a lot more people to be sick, I hope not, but this is just one sensitivity scenario. If you have a lot more people sick, then maybe having the hospital is going to be far more important than maybe doing something else. And the impact to health, for example, your health impact could be quite significantly higher, because you have to bear in mind this is in relation to your base case. So you've got a lot of sick people and not getting treatment, that is a very bad outcome. Whereas you now got the hospital and these people are getting treated, so the outcome is far better, and the impact is actually considerably more positive and it's more material than it would have been if you had a much lower population growth rate. And that could be just, it could be any reasons why the population growth rate could be, it could be new developments, you've got migration towards that town for it could become a tourism hotspot, or any number of reasons. So, like I said, you should be flexible with your assumptions and then conduct sensitivity analysis as well. So, in a sense, you could actually have almost, 3 impact risk assessments done. Your initial one where you've got your mitigation enhancement strategies, and another one for your sensitivity tests. And all of this can go into your report, and it's good to present a broad perspective on that. All right, another thing I want to cover off on now, and it seems like I've been going for a while here. I could get quite excited about this because I worked, like I said, for quite a long time on this social impact evaluation. But anyway, we've got this thing known as the appraisal summary table. This has been adopted from the transport guidelines from the UK. It's been modified a little bit. So at the top part here, we've got things like description of your project, defining your problem, defining your impact baseline, and also what your strategic targets are for that particular project. And then what I've got below, which I think is a little bit more significant, and I haven't got the full table here, but I've got it as you identify impacts, some of the stuff we talked about earlier, such as quality of living, culture, health, environmental, and economic. And you put in a qualitative description describing exactly what you mean by each one of those. In this case, I've just got the main heading, so you have a number of different things under there, like, for example, under environmental, you could have water pollution, you could have noise pollution. Like, for example, under health, you could have a number of, fatal accidents, or the number of people dying of infectious diseases, or something along those lines. And you have a description describing that. Next 3 columns is what we call the part which we actually take out of the impact risk assessment, and that is then putting the results of that impact risk assessment into whether it's a short, medium, or long-term impact. So you may have something that's significant, and we've discovered that from our impact risk assessment, so we consider that material, but that may be material in the medium run and not the short run. The short run could be something you're describing in relation to the construction of the project, something that's going to occur in the next 3 or 4 years. It is fairly flexible, different projects have different lives. And this impact comes in, let's say, in the medium run, so once it's been running for a few years. And that's in relation to population growth, for example. So you've got a high population growth. Actually improving your infrastructure is going to be necessary for your medium and your long run, but you need to get that done now because it takes a while to actually build things and all. So yeah, so it's just allocating where those impacts are most likely to occur. You can do that with a number of ways. Maybe you've got a quantitative value you want to put in there, like in terms of 3-month reduction waiting for new kidneys or something like that, and you can put that in there. Or if you're not too sure, maybe you can put high, medium, or low, or you can even put just a tick, or 2 ticks, or 3 ticks. I think it's entirely up to you how you want to present it. Finally, the last column, this is where it interacts again with the cost-benefit analysis. So you mentioned before we identified impacts that could go into the cost-benefit analysis. So once they've been evaluated using cost-benefit analysis, and you have a dollar value, those dollar values can now go into your appraisal summary table. And that's only going to be certain impacts that you're going to have that for. So you just leave it blank for those that you don't have. And that would be fair enough. So that's how you'd populate your appraisal summary table. All right, so what's next? A report. And how the reporting could be done is some of your social impact stuff is going to go straight into cost-benefit analysis and it'll be reported there. And some of it's going to go into your business case chapter. It can be reported there. And also, generally, you'd probably like to see either a social impact evaluation report or maybe an appendix to your business case. So what are the important things that should be in all of this? So first up, you need to have your baseline and how you defined your baseline. Ideally, even before that, actually, you should define your problem and how that problem is being addressed. And that can also be shown through your baseline as well, because your baseline is kind of looking at your problem and also your problem going forward. So those two would interact. You also have a look at defining your social impacts. What are your social impacts? And you go about that, like I mentioned before, using past projects, stakeholder engagement, or even the list of impacts I mentioned before. You've also got to determine which impacts are negative, which are positive, and also which impacts are material. And to determine materiality, what we recommend is going through the impact risk assessment using the 5x5 matrix, probability and consequence. Is it high? Yep, material. If it's not, if it's in the green or the yellow, so the yellow, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And work off a different approach depending on that. More emphasis definitely needs to be put on the material impacts. And also if you can quantify them and hopefully maybe even monetize them as well for your cost-benefit analysis. And last of all, which I think is going to be very important, is to have that appraisal summary table. So that will pull everything together from your cost-benefit analysis, maybe even your financial analysis. The way you put that, though, is interesting. You could actually have it in a standalone social impact evaluation report. It could even go in the cost-benefit analysis report, and probably almost certainly is going to be part of your business case, as at least as an attachment. Okay, so we've talked about reporting now. So how do we actually go about doing this? As I mentioned, there's quite a few ways of doing that, but what might help is if you actually have a spreadsheet set up. This is something that I worked on with Building Queensland, and they have a spreadsheet there, but just quickly cover off on what you can do with a spreadsheet. It helps having a spreadsheet in the sense that you'll be looking at the same sort of impacts, so there's a bit of consistency. Some people that are new to this might not know what you mean by social impact, so we've got the lists within the spreadsheet itself, which you can actually feed off, and then you can use it as categories and subcategories, and you can take from those categories the impacts that you identify either using the categories or using the other methods such as stakeholder engagement, and then you can actually helps you get a bit of a kickstart on that. Also helps as well in terms of defining your base case or your social impact baseline, as again it's more structured around that, and also helps you as well if you're looking at in terms of sources, you know where to put your source for that and how it's been determined, and also as well you also be able to compare what your impact is, your baseline is, as well as your drivers. What are your key drivers that are actually driving these impacts, and what are the key assumptions behind those drivers? You have a spreadsheet, you can actually just put it all in there, just present it in one place. And with this as well, you can actually create an automated impact risk assessment, which once you've defined all of your impacts, you can actually just use drop-down boxes to just place them within the spreadsheet itself, and that's actually good within a workshop. So you actually have this automated spreadsheet you can put on a big screen, and then you have whoever's running the workshop can actually use the drop downs to select the various impacts and where they should go. As you can see here in the picture, that's just an example of an impact risk assessment that can be done within a spreadsheet. You can see there's a number of buttons there linking backwards and forwards to various different pages and how that can be used. And also as well, having an automated spreadsheet, once you've done all that work, you can actually automate an appraisal summary table, because in a sense, appraisal summary table shouldn't be extra work, but it's just a general summary of all the work that you've done. So instead of having to fiddle around for a long time pulling that together, you can have a spreadsheet that automates it. And using the spreadsheet approach or model approach to something like Microsoft Excel, you can actually make your social impact evaluation a lot quicker and a lot easier to do, and also improve the consistency. All right, that takes me to the end of this social impact evaluation presentation. I think I'm probably going to have another one that's going to be a little bit more high level stuff. This one got into a little bit more of the details behind about how you go about it. So this is intended for an audience that I think really wants to get in and do that work for hands-on, basically. I should probably said that at the beginning at the end. But anyway, just give a bit of context. Actually, probably glad I'm saying it at the end because people might just stop the video. I like it. You can actually watch it all the way to the end. But anyway, if you like this video, click the like button. If you want to see videos of a similar nature, I think I'll probably have at least one more social impact evaluation video. Remember to hit the subscribe button. I've also got plenty of videos on cost-benefit analysis, basic economic concepts. I've got some videos out on game theory as well, and also a number of conference videos too. So yeah, like I said, if you're interested in any of that stuff, remember to hit the subscribe button. And I'm mostly uploading videos on Mondays and Fridays. So those are the days to look out for some of the new stuff I'm going to put on. Well, thank you anyway, and yeah, hopefully I'll be seeing you soon.